Shalom, shalom to everyone out there. Shalom. Hopefully everyone's having a lovely, lovely day today, especially for the Most High's 1/3 hopeful elect out there on this blistering 95 plus degree day, which feels like 102 in the sun. All right, but nonetheless, it's a lovely day out there today. It's nice and sunny. A lot of you guys can't see it, obviously, because, I don't have it on my camera. But anyway, Yasharallah, I found out something that's very, very interesting, right? Rooting from a couple of conversations that I've been having over the last couple of days concerning this Juneteenth thing, right? Which is supposedly a national holiday for us so-called black folks, right? FBA's ADOS, right? And which is abbreviated for Foundational Black Americans and African American descendants of slaves or the enslaved, right? So from the discussions that I was having over the last couple of days of how, us brothers and sisters in the faith, we really don't celebrate Juneteenth, although I'm not personally trying to knock Juneteenth because I think it's a beautiful time for us to come together and, acknowledge what our ancestors or forefathers did for each other during the freeing of the enslaved, right? Which was down in Texas, by the way. And, it's up for debate. Some people will also add in Mississippi or Louisiana or Arkansas, places like that, right? Oklahoma, but mainly for Texas, right? Because during that time when Abraham Lincoln, he pronounced the Proclamation of Emancipation, it was said that the word didn't reach as far as the deep southern states, which is Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Mississippi, but mainly Texas, right? So basically, this is what this is all about. This is a commemoration of how the so-called African American Union soldiers was given the authority to go down to as far as Texas to free the rest of the enslaved so-called black people, because the message didn't reach down to those guys who was in Texas. So they had to go down on the month of June, which is the month that we're in today. And unfortunately for them, a lot of the Caucasian Union soldiers didn't want to go with them, because for one, it was too hot, and for two, it was too far deep down south. And for three, they didn't want to see any more so-called Caucasian bloodshed in this war, in the attempt supposedly to free the so-called African Americans of this country. So they gave the authority to the Union African American soldiers to go down and free the rest of their people down in Texas. All right. So really, this was a Texas thing, not a whole southern United States thing. All right. Which goes all the way up to the Mason-Dixon line, which is from Virginia, or some people will argue that it's the middle of Maryland, or the start of Maryland, all the way down to Florida. And then when you're heading west, it goes all the way far as, I believe, Missouri. All right. That's why the Missouri Compromise and the Nebraska Purchase was involved, because of that Mason-Dixon line. All right. But that's like for a whole different video, right? And which I probably would include in this video. But I sort of want to make this a little quick and straight to the point, due to the reason why, us so-called Hebrew Israelites, as the world like to call us, we just call ourselves the hopeful 1/3 elect and servants of the Most High, if you're really of the faith, right? So we was having this discussion about Juneteenth and how they were saying, Juneteenth is a national holiday now, and we all as black people in this country should be celebrating it, right? Now, just like I said, I don't knock Juneteenth at all. If this is what y'all want to do and y'all want to give this commemoration to our ancestors or whatever, or, what they did for the rest of the black folks down in Texas, the freedom from slavery or chattel slavery, I should say, force induced labor, right? Then it's all good. But my argument with those people was, according to our faith, all right, according to our faith, we don't celebrate or acknowledge or commemorate anything that's not biblical. Okay? So that was my whole argument, and it's still my argument. All right? And that's not only concerning Juneteenth. Okay? That's concerning all of the holidays that's not biblical. All right? You got the 4th of July, which is the 4th of July. Unfortunately, a lot of our people celebrate that. Why? I have no idea. Because the 4th of July took place in 1776 in this country. Where was our ancestors and what was they doing in this country during July the 4th, 1776? I would love to know. Put it down in the comment section. And by the way, I'm just being sarcastic. Right? So a lot of our people celebrate these days that's made or ordained in this country, and it have nothing to do with us, right? You got so-called Labor Day in September. And then right back into October, you get back into the paganism. Okay, you got the day Samhain. Some people will argue that it's pronounced Samhain, by the way it's pronounced, but it's really Samhain. I looked into it, right? But to each his own, which is AKA Halloween by the day, which is a heavily demonic day, right? No person who's a professed Israelite should be keeping anything concerning Samhain, aka Halloween. Okay? And then you also have Thanksgiving. Okay? Why are our people celebrating that? I have no idea whatsoever, right? Which was a slaughtering of the so-called Native Americans. Okay, supposedly here before the Western African enslaved involved, right? So I'm not too sure why our people celebrate that day too, but this, as I said, to each his own. Whatever they feel like to do, let them go ahead and do it. I mean, that's the reason why there's a 1/3 and a 2/3, right? And no matter how many times you try to tell our people that these are days that we're not supposed to be celebrating, especially if it's commemorating the slaughter of the Native American Indians. All right. We shouldn't be partaking in days like that, man. Okay. Even if you're a professed Israelite or if you're still in the world, which is the 2/3, as we like to call them, according to our community, our faith community. All right. You shouldn't be keeping days like that. All right. I mean, what if someone was commemorating a day where your ancestors got off those slave ships? It was sold all across the South, right? Not even all across the South, but actually in the North too, during the colonial times. All right. The 13 colonial states up and down the Eastern Seaboard. All right. And let's not forget the West. Okay. They also had slaves in the West, whether they was Native American or from West Africa. All right. That's the whole reason why they went to West Africa to get us, because they already had the Native Americans over here slaved. Okay. In the Midwest and in the West Coast and in the Southwest. So have you. All right. So as two nations of people, we both were enslaved by the so-called white man. Right. So this is the reason why we shouldn't be commemorating these days, man. Now, I understand that you want to, have fun with your family or whatever, or this might be the only time that you have off of work or whatever. And this is the only time that you can get together, other than a funeral or something like that. But you still doing it in a pagan custom. All right. And the reason why I say it's a pagan custom, because it's not of the Most High and it's not biblical. All right. Anything that's not concerning the scripture is pagan, man. Okay? If it's not a biblical ordinance, if it's not a biblical high holy day, it's considered pagan. All right? What's the definition of pagan? Anything that's against God. Anything that's against acknowledging the Most High, all the works of the Most High power. Okay? Anything that's against acknowledging the Most High's ordinances, his statutes, his high holy days, his people, by the way. Right? So it's still considered a pagan or paganistic holiday. Even this day right here, Juneteenth, Salakia. Right? Although we want to claim it as our own and say this is something for us and this is something to commemorate our ancestors, before us that, went down to Texas and freed the rest of the enslaved or whatever. But does this commemorate the Most High? Does anything about Juneteenth commemorates the Most High? Just like I was asking the people who I was having a discussion with. What about Juneteenth that commemorates the Most High? Right? Is it about your ancestors, which is your deceased ancestors, by the way, who's no longer here, at least in the flesh, but the spirit never dies, right? So who is this commemorating? Is it commemorating the Most High or your ancestors? If you ask me, this is no different than Cinco de Mayo and Mardi Gras, in which the so-called Mexicans do, right? Which is a commemoration of the dead, an honoring of the dead, all right? That's prohibited by the Most High. Okay, that's what's considered necromancy. Okay, when you're honoring the dead, you're cherishing the dead, you're worshiping the dead. Okay, that's an abomination in the Most High's eyes, man. So if they're doing that on Mardi Gras and Cinco de Mayo, and basically they're doing the same thing on Juneteenth, then what do you call that? If this is giving honorarieship to the deceased soldiers, okay, that's what you would call necromancy, man. Right? This is what I was telling the people who I was having a discussion with. All right. It's not about bashing a day that we've created for ourselves, which is you're creating your own righteousness, by the way, according to scripture. But we ain't going to get into that right now, probably later on in the video. But this is what this is. Okay. So you're commemorating the deceased people, all right, that passed on nearly over a century ago. All right. This is what you call necromancy, man. Okay. But just like I said, I'm not bashing this day. If you want to celebrate this day, fine. Right. Because, just like I said, there's a 2/3 and a 1/3. A lot of people are still asleep. A lot of people are still blindly celebrating these so-called holidays. Okay. And they really don't even know what they're doing. They're not knowing what it's about. And they don't know how this goes against the Most High. They think it's a good thing because they're celebrating their own people. Right. But there's certain ordinances and high holy days that the Most High gave the children of Yasharallah to keep according to biblical standards, man, which pleases the Most High. Right? We shouldn't be keeping the customs of the world, traditions of men. All right. This is what you're doing. This is what Hamashiach spoke about, in which the world calls Christ. All right. You deny the commandments and the ordinances of the Most High to keep the traditions of men. Okay. What is that tradition of men? That's Juneteenth. Okay. And then right around the corner after this is going to be 4th of July, aka 4th of July. All right. This is traditions of men, man. No matter if it's for the so-called YT man or the so-called African American, it's still traditions of men. Okay, it's not a tradition of the Most High. There's nowhere in the scripture where you can point out where it says keep Juneteenth for all of the commemoration of all of the deceased soldiers that freed you from chattel slavery. But you're still a slave, right? You still owned. Okay, you're celebrating a day, all right, supposedly about being free to do whatever you want. Okay, this is what this day is about. So-called freedom, right? Free, D-U-M-B, freedom, right? This is what you're celebrating, but you're not free, man. Why? You're still paying taxes. You still have to break your arse just to survive in this society. Okay, if you happen to come across a job or get a job or earn a living that's off the books or whatever, so to speak, and you don't pay your tribute, as the scripture called it, aka taxes, guess what? You're going to go to jail. Look what happened to Wesley Snipes, amongst many others, right? He had to do a 3-year bid, man. Federal time, hard time. Why? Because he hadn't paid taxes. From his own hard-earned money, from his profession, which is acting, entertainment, right? As the scripture call it, public gesture. Okay? He still had to do 3 years behind bars, man, because he didn't pay Caesar his due, which is the tribute. All right, so you're not free, right? Just like I say in all of my other videos, try to go to places like Iran, China, Ukraine, so-called Russia. Try to go to North Korea. Try to go to all of these places if you so-called free and see what happens, right? I'm not even going to get into the so-called jab. That's a whole different video there. But guess what? I tell you one thing, if you're going to try to get on any train or any plane, or even still with certain facilities, okay, or vicinities that you try to enter, and you don't have the you-know-what, see what happens. Right? A good 2 or 3 years ago, you couldn't even go into certain restaurants, bars, movie theaters, even schools, colleges. I mean, I can go on and on down the list, man, if you didn't have the so-called you-know-what, right? So if you're free and we have freedom of speech, freedom of choice to do whatever the hell we want, how come no one was able to deny that 3 or 4 years before? Oh, but you're free, right? This is what you celebrate Juneteenth for. This is what we're celebrating. The sham has been over our eyes, man, for many, many, many years, man. Many years. And then when you got someone that try to come along and wake them up and let them see the light, to let them know that, hey, you're celebrating a day of being free, but you're really not free, right? This is what you've been told, that you was free through the proclamation of the emancipation, right? But when you look up the definition of proclamation, it just means to profess to the public. It's not an actual law or statute given from the U.S. government themselves. Okay? But what people are doing is celebrating the idea of being free. They love the idea of being free, but they're truly not free according to the U.S. Constitution. If you're homeborn, if you're an immigrant, you came over later, then they're just going to deport your ass, right? That's the reason why they have ICE for. So technically, no one's free. You still got to bow down to the beast, no matter what. Does that mean live the rest of your life in fear? Live the rest of your life in a cave somewhere under a rock? No, I'm not saying that. But you still have to know what time it is and know what society that you're living in and know the status of your people, which is you're not free. You're truly not free, man. So why the hell are you celebrating Juneteenth for? Yes, you've been freed from chattel slavery, from force-induced labor, indentured servitude, but you're technically not free. Okay? But this is what this day is supposed to be about, right? So this is my whole argument concerning this, right? But we're going to get right into it, as it says here. Well, I'm saying like I haven't already been speaking for, but we're going to get further into it, right? Never mind me, that's just my sense of humor, right? So as it says here, did a quick Google search with all of this, right? It says, is Juneteenth a federal holiday, right? And which they wanted to prove to me, but I already agreed. I already knew that Joe Biden signed it into law, back in 2021, as it says here, right? But my whole argument is, if you're a Hebrew Israelite, right, not through faith, right, not through thinking you're a Hebrew Israelite, by actual blood, you're a part of the 12 tribes, the so-called 12 tribes of Israel, right? Through blood, through lineage. You're not supposed to be keeping this day, because if it's not a biblical high holy day, you're not supposed to be celebrating this day. Okay? You don't see Muslims celebrating Juneteenth, no matter if they are so-called ADOS and FBAs. All right? And to a point, with certain denominations in so-called Christianity, or churchianity as I call it, you're not going to see some of those guys keeping so-called Juneteenth, right? At least some of them have a little bit of sense. Okay? So if you have someone who's professing to be of the faith that's of the Hebrew Israelite community, why get upset with people in that faith instead of Muslims, right? If a Muslim tell you, oh, no, I don't keep Juneteenth, nothing said. But someone who's professing to be of the true faith, the one and only true faith, according to the biblical scripture, you got a problem with that, right? But nonetheless, back to what I was reading, right? Yes, Juneteenth is a federal holiday in the United States. It was officially designated as a federal holiday in 2021, when then President Joe Biden signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act into law. Okay, so right here, this day as a national holiday is a law, not freedom for you so-called Negroes. Just this day as a national holiday. But guess what? Not just only so-called FBAs and ADOS benefit from this. Everyone benefit from this, right? So this isn't really only for you. Just as the so-called Civil Rights Act, not Civil Rights Law, Civil Rights Act. All right? Hear me when I say that. That don't only just benefit us as Black people, foundational Black Americans. That benefits everyone, including immigrants. All right? But look into that. Juneteenth commemorates the end of slavery in the United States, right? Which is chattel slavery, forced-induced labor, right? Not freedom. All right? Juneteenth, officially known as Juneteenth National Independence Day, is celebrated annually on June 19th. It's a day when many federal employees have a day off, okay? Federal employees, not everyone. Okay, so if you have a governmental job, like say if you work for the IRS, or, you work for some governmental agency in Washington, D.C., as a special agent, or CIA, FBI, or something like that, ATF, then, this day is for you that you'll have off, right? So it doesn't matter if you're so-called Black or white. This day right here benefits everyone. So we like to claim this day as a day for ourselves, but everyone benefiting from this. Just like I said, but the Civil Rights Movement or Act. Everyone benefits from that. But somehow, some way, we wind up being the face of the Civil Rights Act or movement. Like it was solely for us, but it really wasn't. We was out there just on the front lines fighting, thinking it was for only us, but it wasn't really for only us. Just like this day right here, right? While it's a federal holiday, not all states or private sector employers are required to observe it as a paid holiday. Okay? Not all states or private sector employers. Okay, so of course, a lot of places in the South that's south of the Mason-Dixon line don't even count on it, right? Your arse still got to go to work, man, right? If your employer or the company that you work for says that you have to have your arse in there 7 a.m. or 8 p.m., you better be up, right? So it's actually not even a national holiday. If it was a true national holiday, everyone will have off. No ands, if, buts about it. Right? Boss better not even think about calling you. You better not even thinking about taking off a PTO because you don't have to. It's a paid holiday for everyone. Right? So really, it's not even a federal holiday for every single person in this country. All right. So this is what I'm talking about, man. Right? We want to celebrate all of these things according to what we think and how we feel, but we actually not doing the due diligence to search these things out, man. Right?